I wasn't looking through my husband's phone. At least, that's what I told myself. His phone was lying on the kitchen counter while he was in the shower. A message appeared. I almost ignored it. Then I saw the first line. "Are you sure she doesn't know?" I froze. I read it again. Then another message appeared. "She can't find out yet." My heart started racing. Who was this woman, and what exactly was my husband hiding from me? When he walked back into the room, I said nothing. I acted normal. I smiled. I even asked him how his day was, but inside, I was already questioning everything. That night, I waited until he fell asleep. Then I looked at the message again. There was a name attached to the number, a name I had never heard before, and beneath it was a photograph. I stared at the screen for several seconds because the woman in that photograph wasn't a stranger. I had seen her before, but I had no idea what she had to do with my husband. And that's when I faced a choice that many people understand all too well. Do you confront the person you love, or stay silent long enough to discover the truth? Before we continue, I want to ask you something. If you saw that message on your partner's phone, what would you do? Would you confront them immediately, or would you wait and find out the truth first? Because what she discovered next was something she never expected. I wasn't looking through my husband's phone. Not intentionally. It was just sitting on the kitchen counter while he was upstairs taking a shower. We had been married long enough that his phone had become just another object in our home, something ordinary, something I never felt the need to question. Then the screen lit up, a new message. I glanced at it without thinking and saw a sentence that made me stop. "Are you sure she doesn't know?" For a moment, I didn't understand what I was reading. Then another message appeared. "She can't find out yet." My stomach tightened. I picked up the phone. I knew I shouldn't, but there are moments when curiosity isn't really curiosity anymore. It's fear. I stared at the number. There was no name saved, just a phone number. I could hear the shower running upstairs. My husband was only a few rooms away, and suddenly I felt like there was a stranger inside my own marriage. I read the messages again. There was no mention of an affair, no declaration of love, nothing that proved anything. But the words were enough to create 100 questions. Who was this person? What couldn't I find out? And most importantly, why did someone believe I shouldn't know? I put the phone back exactly where I found it. When my husband came downstairs, I acted as if nothing had happened. He walked into the kitchen, smiled, asked me what I wanted for dinner. I looked at him and wondered how many times someone could look directly into your eyes while hiding something from you. I almost asked him, but I stopped because I had another thought. What if I confronted him too soon? What if he deleted the messages? What if the truth disappeared before I had a chance to understand it? So I said nothing. That night, after he fell asleep, I lay awake beside him. The room was dark. His breathing was steady. Everything looked normal. But I couldn't stop thinking about those two sentences. Are you sure she doesn't know? She can't find out yet. At around 2 in the morning, I finally reached for my phone. I didn't want to invade his privacy, but I needed answers. I opened the message again, and this time I noticed something I hadn't seen before. The number had a profile photograph. I zoomed in. My heart stopped. I recognized the woman. I had seen her before, but I had never imagined that she could have anything to do with my husband. And suddenly, I understood something terrifying. The message wasn't the secret. The message was only the beginning. I couldn't stop thinking about the photograph. The woman in it wasn't someone I knew, but I had seen her before. Not in person, in an old family photo. She had been standing in the background at a birthday party several years ago. I remembered because my husband had introduced her as an old family friend. At the time, I hadn't thought anything of it. Now, that memory felt completely different. I saved the number from the message. Then I searched for the name connected to it. Nothing. No social media profile, no familiar contact, just a number. I almost gave up. Then I noticed something. The area code was from a town nearly 2 hours away. Why would someone from there be messaging my husband? I waited until morning. When my husband left for work, I opened the family photo album. I went through pictures one by one. Birthdays, Christmas dinners, family vacations, old weddings. Then I found it. The same woman, standing beside my husband's sister. I turned the photograph over. There was a handwritten date, December 14th, 2018. I stared at it. That was the year my husband had told me he was traveling for work for several weeks. Suddenly, an old memory came rushing back. He had called me every night. He had said he was exhausted. He had said the trip was difficult. I had trusted him. Now I wondered, where had he really been? I decided to call the number. 1 ring, 2, 3. Then someone answered, a woman's voice. She didn't say hello. She simply asked, "Who is this?" I told her my name. There was silence. Then her breathing changed. She sounded frightened. I asked her why she had been messaging my husband. She didn't answer. I asked again, "Who are you?" Finally, she said, "You need to ask your husband." Then the line went dead. I called back. No answer. I tried again. Still nothing. My hands were shaking. I didn't know what scared me more, the fact that she refused to tell me the truth, or the fact that she sounded like she was afraid of my husband. That afternoon, my husband came home from work. He walked into the kitchen and kissed me like nothing had happened. I looked at him. Then I asked, "Do you know a woman named Claire?" He froze. It lasted less than a second, but I saw it, that tiny pause, that moment when someone realizes the secret they've been protecting may no longer be a secret. He asked me why I was asking. I told him I had seen her message. His face changed. Then he said something I never expected. "You weren't supposed to see that." Not, "I don't know her." Not, "It's not what you think." Just, "You weren't supposed to see that." And suddenly, I knew. Whatever the truth was, he had been hiding it from me. But I still didn't know why. And I wasn't prepared for the question he asked me next. "Did you talk to her?" Because the way he said it made me realize that he was more afraid of that woman than I was of finding out about her. The moment my husband asked whether I had spoken to her, I knew something was wrong. Not because of what he said, because of the fear in his voice. I looked at him and asked, "Why are you so afraid of her?" He didn't answer. Instead, he walked toward the kitchen window and stared outside. For several seconds, he said nothing. Then he finally turned around. "It's complicated." Those were the words people used when they didn't want to tell you the truth. I asked him how long he had known Claire. He said, "A long time." I asked how long. He wouldn't answer. So I asked a different question. "Did you ever have a relationship with her?" He looked down, then shook his head. "Not like that." Not like that. I immediately noticed the choice of words. So I asked, "Then what does that mean?" He took a deep breath. He told me Claire was someone from his past, someone he had known before we met. He said they had once been close, but their relationship had ended years before our marriage. I asked why she was contacting him now. Again, silence. Then he said something that made my heart sink. She needed my help. I asked with what? He said he couldn't tell me. I almost laughed, not because anything was funny, because I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My husband was standing in front of me, telling me there was a secret involving another woman and still asking me to trust him. I asked him whether I had anything to worry about. He looked directly at me. No. But his answer came too quickly. I knew that look. It was the same look people have when they are trying to convince themselves of something too. I told him about the photograph, the old family picture, the woman standing beside his sister. His expression changed. He asked where I had found it. I told him. Then I asked, "Then why didn't you ever tell me about her?" He said there had never been a reason. I asked, "Then why is she messaging you now?" He had no answer. I could feel my anger rising, but underneath the anger was something worse. Fear, because I realized I had spent years believing I knew my husband. Maybe I knew the man he had become, but I knew almost nothing about the person he had been before me. Then his phone vibrated. He looked at the screen. I saw his face change. He immediately turned the phone over. I asked, "Is that her?" He said nothing. I stood up. "Is that Claire?" Finally, he nodded. I asked him to show me the message. He refused, and that was the moment something inside me broke. Not because of the message itself, because he was still choosing secrecy. I told him, "If there's nothing wrong, why can't you show me?" He looked exhausted. Then he whispered, "Because once you know the whole story, you may never look at me the same way again." The room went silent. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that there was an innocent explanation. But trust doesn't disappear all at once. Sometimes it disappears one unanswered question at a time. And I had one left question. What was Claire asking my husband to hide from me? The next morning, my husband finally told me the truth. Or at least, the first part of it. He asked me to sit down. His hands were trembling. He looked at me for a long moment before saying, "Claire wasn't trying to hide an affair." I didn't know whether to feel relieved or even more afraid. I asked him what she was hiding. He reached into a drawer and pulled out an old phonograph. It showed him and Claire when they were much younger. But there was someone else in the picture. A little girl. I stared at the photograph. I had never seen her before. My husband told me that before we met, Claire had become pregnant. The child had been placed with another family after a complicated series of events. For years, my husband believed he had lost any chance of knowing what happened to her. Then, several months earlier, Claire contacted him. She had found the daughter. She wanted him to meet her, and she had asked him to keep it secret until they knew whether the young woman wanted contact with him. I looked at him. "So that's what the messages were about?" He nodded. The words, "Are you sure she doesn't know?" suddenly made sense. But another question remained. "Then why didn't you tell me?" He lowered his eyes. He said he was afraid I would think he had returned to Claire, afraid I would believe he had betrayed me, afraid that telling me about a daughter from his past would change the life we had built together. I understood the fear, but understanding it didn't make the secrecy disappear. I asked him, "How many times did you meet her?" He hesitated. That hesitation hurt. He admitted they had met several times, not romantically, but secretly. And every time he came home and acted as though nothing had happened, he was asking me to continue believing a version of reality that wasn't true. I looked at the photograph again. The little girl in the picture had grown into a woman who had spent years wondering about her biological father. And suddenly, I realized this wasn't only my husband's secret. It was her story too. I asked him whether he had met her. He nodded. Then he reached for his phone. He opened a photograph. There she was, a young woman standing outside a coffee shop. She looked nervous, and somehow, she looked familiar. My husband said, "She wants to meet you." I couldn't speak. After everything I had discovered, after the fear, the anger, and the questions, I was suddenly faced with a completely different choice. Not whether I believed my husband, but whether I was willing to meet the person who had unknowingly become part of our marriage's biggest secret. And as I looked at her photograph, I realized something. The message I had found on my husband's phone hadn't revealed an affair. It had revealed a family that had been separated by years of silence. But that didn't mean the lie was harmless. Because even when the secret has a good reason, the person kept in the dark still has to decide whether trust can survive it. The photograph stayed on the table between us. I looked at the young woman again. She wasn't responsible for any of this. She hadn't asked to become a secret. She hadn't asked to be kept away from her father. And she certainly hadn't asked to become the reason my marriage was suddenly filled with questions. My husband sat across from me. For the first time since I had discovered the message, he wasn't trying to defend himself. He simply waited. I asked him one question. If I had never seen that message, would you ever have told me? He didn't answer immediately. That silence told me more than his words could have. Finally, he said, "I don't know." I felt tears come to my eyes, not because I believed he had cheated, but because I realized how easily our marriage could have continued with a truth hidden somewhere beneath it. I told him I needed time. I couldn't forgive him in one conversation, but I also couldn't pretend that the woman in the photograph didn't exist. She deserved to know her father, and my husband deserved the chance to finally stop running from his past. The question was whether I could be part of that future after everything that had happened. A few days later, my husband asked me again, "Will you come with me to meet her?" I looked at him, then at the photograph. I thought about all the choices that had brought us there. His choice to keep the secret, my choice to look at the message, Claire's choice to reach out, and this young woman's choice to search for the father she had never known. There was no perfect answer, so I told him, "I'll come." Not because everything was forgiven, not because the hurt had disappeared, but because I didn't want another person to pay the price for a secret she never created. We met her at a quiet coffee shop. She stood when we walked in. She looked nervous. My husband stopped several feet away from her. Neither of them knew what to say. Then she whispered, "Dad?" My husband's eyes filled with tears. He nodded, and they hugged. I watched them from across the table. For a moment, the anger inside me became quieter. Not gone, just quieter. Because I finally understood something I wish I had known before that message appeared on his phone. A relationship doesn't survive because there are no secrets. It survives when both people choose honesty after the secrets are exposed. And now I want to ask you, if you were in my position, would you have stayed? Would you have forgiven a partner who didn't cheat but still kept a life-changing secret from you? Or would that broken trust have been enough to make you walk away? You don't have to share anything deeply personal, but if you've lived through something similar, tell us only what you're comfortable sharing. Your experience might help someone reading these comments realize they are not the only one.
Can trust survive after a secret? At first, this story seems simple. A wife sees a suspicious message on her husband's phone. She assumes the worst. But when the truth finally comes out, she discovers something more complicated than an affair. Her husband wasn't cheating, he was hiding a daughter from his past. And that leaves us with a much harder question. Can trust survive a secret, even when the secret wasn't an affair? We often think betrayal automatically means cheating, but trust is bigger than romance. When someone hides something important from the person they love, the damage can come from the secrecy itself. The wife wasn't only hurt by what her husband had hidden, she was hurt because he made the decision that she didn't need to know, and that's an important difference. You can understand someone's reason without agreeing with their decision. This is where the story becomes complicated. She wasn't intentionally searching through his phone. She saw the message by accident. But once she became suspicious, she chose to investigate. Was that wrong? Some people will say, absolutely, privacy matters. Others will say, if there was nothing to hide, why was he hiding it? There isn't necessarily one answer, and that's exactly why this question belongs to the audience. If you discovered a message like this, would you investigate or confront your partner immediately? Her husband believed he was protecting his marriage. He was afraid she would misunderstand his relationship with Claire. He was afraid she would think he had returned to his past, and he was afraid that revealing his daughter would change everything. Fear can make people make terrible decisions. Sometimes people don't lie because they don't love someone. Sometimes they lie because they're afraid of what the truth might cost them. But there's a problem. A secret doesn't remove the consequences, it only delays them. This may be the most important lesson in the story. The wife eventually understood why her husband kept the secret, but understanding his reason didn't immediately repair the damage. That's realistic. Forgiveness doesn't have to happen instantly. Trust doesn't return because someone says, "I'm sorry." Trust has to be rebuilt through consistent honesty. One conversation can reveal the truth, but rebuilding trust can take much longer. There was another important perspective, the daughter. She didn't create the secret. She didn't ask to become part of a complicated past. She simply wanted to know her father. And this reminds us that family secrets rarely affect only the people keeping them. Sometimes the people who suffer most are the ones who had no control over the secret in the first place. The wife now has a choice. She could leave, she could forgive, or she could stay, but demand that the relationship be rebuilt differently. None of those choices is automatically right for everyone, because every relationship has different boundaries. Some people can forgive a secret, some can't. Some people can rebuild trust. Others realize that once trust is broken, they can never feel the same again. and that's okay. Forgiveness is personal.
The choice after the truth. In the end, I realized something I hadn't understood when I first saw that message. The biggest question wasn't whether my husband had cheated. He hadn't. The real question was whether I could trust him again after he had chosen to keep something so important from me. For a while, I thought forgiveness meant pretending nothing had happened. It doesn't. Forgiveness doesn't erase the hurt. It doesn't erase the questions. And it certainly doesn't mean trust returns overnight. My husband had to earn that trust again, not with promises, with honesty, day after day. And I had to decide whether I was willing to rebuild our marriage with the truth finally on the table. I chose to stay, but I also chose something else. I chose not to forget what the secret had taught me. Because love isn't about knowing every detail of someone's past. It's about knowing that when something affects your future, you won't be left in the dark. And that young woman, she finally got the chance to know her father. Perhaps that was the unexpected gift hidden inside all that pain. A secret had divided people for years, but once the truth came out, it finally gave them a chance to decide what came next. Maybe you would have left, maybe you would have stayed, maybe you would have forgiven, or maybe the broken trust would have been too much. And that's okay. There isn't one answer that fits every relationship. But if you've ever faced a secret that changed the way you saw someone you loved, you are not alone. If you're comfortable sharing, tell us, what would you have done in her position? You don't need to share names or anything deeply personal, just your experience, because your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear tonight. And if this episode reminded you of someone who needs to hear it, share this story with them. If you want another emotional story next week, subscribe to Tribal Survival Feast, because here we don't just tell stories, we try to understand the people behind them. Every secret has a story, and every story has a human being worth understanding.